Hi there. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dr. Christy Vernaleken.
And I'm Dr. Lindsay Renzullo.
So today we have a very exciting guest. We have Christy Berger, who has joined us from Gold Country Wildlife Rescue in Auburn, California. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, welcome.
Happy to be here.
So we haven't really delved much into the whole wildlife spectrum so far in any of our podcasts. So why don't you give us a little introduction of kind of who you are and how you came into the field and what you do?
Sure. So my role with Gold Country is I wear several hats. I'm a board member. I'm a volunteer board member. I'm also on our education team. I volunteer during baby season at our center. And then so birds are pretty much my specialty. And I'm also a certified California naturalist. So that gives me a lot of information on natural history so that we can figure out, where's the best place to release this bird or things like that. So understanding their environment that they live in. I got involved. I took a natural history class actually years ago, and I just fell in love with birds and wildlife. And they had a flyer about needing volunteers in the baby bird nursery. So that's what got me started. And yeah, I love it. So
yeah, I think it's like everyone who's involved in animals, including us, all got sucked in by some baby animal, right?
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
So I think an important thing to talk about with the public who's hopefully watching this is what is wildlife rehab, and so what do you do as a wildlife rehabilitator?
Right. So most wildlife rehabilitation facilities are nonprofits and really based with a lot of volunteers. Some, I think, in some parts of the U.S. are more government run. That's very few and far between. So we're a nonprofit. We rely on public donations. And so what we do is we take in injured, sick, and orphan wildlife. So we have state and federal permits to care for wildlife, and we provide them with any needed treatment. If it's an orphaned animal, we feed them and raise them up and get them ready, always with the goal of getting them released back into an appropriate environment when they're old enough. We all wear a lot of hats because we're volunteer based. We do have some paid staff, but it's a lot of us kind of running around. We take in this year we took in over 3,700 animals.
Wow.
And just imagine that many animals with, a limited number of paid staff and trying to function off of volunteers. Nobody paying for these animals. We're trying to do this all off of mostly donations and grants. So we do a lot of networking with other rescues because some of us might have capabilities others don't. We have some administrative tasks we all do, fundraising. We take in a lot of phone calls. We do education. We have to transport animals around, and we do some advocacy work as well. And we have to have a lot of knowledge. We took in over 200 different species last year, so we have to have a lot of knowledge, or at least be able to access the knowledge about each species because their diets are all different. We have to understand, how to handle them, how they're sensitive, what medications might work or not work for them. So it's a lot, but we do our best, and yeah.
So when we often, like as vets, we're working diligently on our creatures, right? And then somebody shows up with like a box with something in it. And I think there's not that much understanding in the public about like what is the difference between a wildlife rehabber who isn't necessarily a veterinarian and often aren't, and vets, and when do you seek veterinary care versus manage those cases on your own?
Right. So yeah, one of the differences is there are no appointments. So we get what we get. We've had, I think our high number for intakes in one day was like 55 animals.
Wow.
Which is, yeah, it's not always that high, but I think that was a record for us. But, and, we do differ in a number of ways. As most wildlife rescues, we actually started as an all volunteer organization. So it was learning from the ground up for a lot of us. Luckily, we still have one of our founders that still works with us. And so, like I said, we have paid staff now, but we don't have the funding for a vet on staff. So luckily we have a very experienced director of animal care who is a volunteer, but she's been doing this for 20 years, so we're very lucky to have her expertise. But because we don't have a vet on staff, we do have a vet of record, but they're not involved on a day-to-day basis. We can consult with them, but so there are obviously some things that we cannot do, like we can't anesthetize animals without a vet there. Things like that. We don't have an x-ray machine. So we do have some vets who volunteer their time when they can, or vets that will give us a discount, say for an x-ray, things like that, or maybe a surgical procedure, which is, not very common, but once in a while we'll get that kind of help. And, like things like when we got the animals burned from the wildfire, we have University of California, Davis has, they've been working with the tilapia fish skins. I don't know if you've heard about that, but those vets there came and helped us when we got some burned mammals in. So they were coming every other day to, or every 3 days to help us, because we'd had to anesthetize those animals in order to treat their wounds. So we do have some help.
Christy, we were introduced to your work through, I think, one of our hospitals in California, the Atlantic Street Pet Emergency. Is that a hospital you're familiar with?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Do you
I had my dog there not that long ago.
So. Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's okay though.
If there are other veterinary practices, whether they are close to you or just anywhere in the country, that were wanting to get involved in volunteering to help rescues, how would you advise that they usually do that?
Yes, so great things that veterinarians can do. They're if it's an emergency vet, if they are open hours that we are not, if you be willing to take in wildlife from the public, that's a huge help. If you're willing to control their pain while they're there, that can be a little tricky if you don't have experience with wildlife, but that might be something you could get training from. So that's a huge thing, because then the public has to keep it overnight sometimes, and it's not always great for the animal. There's some other things, like if you can offer a discounted rate, reach out and say, hey, I can do this for you. Or things like medications that have expired. If they're not that expired, as a regular vet can't use that, but we can, because these are not owned animals, so we're able to use medications that are just past their expiration date, that and that, things like that, and supplies as well. So if you have some supplies that you want to donate, we're happy to take those off your hands, or even just, providing some training for our staff on certain things, or donating, some time at the rescue, even if it's just, once a month coming in for a day, things like that.
I think, the wildlife rehab too, like the biggest details are a lot of that long-term care and not having them imprint on people and making sure that they're releasable, right? Which vets are definitely not very knowledgeable in and or experienced in unless they've had special training.
Right. Yeah. So that's part of it too. It's not, it's different than working with a domestic animal. They have to be able to be released. So there's things you can treat or do with domestic animals. You could amputate a leg and that animal will be fine, and be able to live out the rest of their life in most cases. Well, you can't do that with a wild animal. There's definitely limits, and they have to be able to be releasable. You can't have a blind, wild animal that you release. So unfortunately, euthanasia is, part of goes with it. It does for regular vets too, but for us, it's more, we have a pretty good success rate though, I will say. We get imprinted animals, like our one of our education, our great horned owl, she raised her and tried to release her, and she was, landing on people, a great horned owl. Right. You can't have that. And when that happens, we take them, we try to wild them up. We do try, and sometimes we're successful with that, but not always, So it's really sad.
It's not like the movie Born Free, where you just yell at them and they run away and everything's fine, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, it's sad because that animal should have been able to live wild, and now they'll have to live in captivity. It's really sad.
Sorry, I had gotten kicked off and now I'm on remotely. So hopefully you guys can hear me okay, because I'm on my cell phone. Okay?
Yeah, you're actually better now. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so I missed it. If I missed it, I was just wondering, like, you must have a lot of wildlife rehab, personnel and people and other people that try to do it at home, which is what you might be talking about. Is it something, though, that you have, like, satellite people, like, at their house that are actually helping these animals? Like, because you probably need it for the 24-hour care for some of these guys.
Yes, exactly. We do have people who do rehabilitation in their homes. In fact, that's how we started. It was all in people's homes. Having a center has been tremendously helpful, but there still are limitations. Things like, we're working, most of our home rehabbers are kind of aging out of the system, though, and for younger people, it's harder for them. It's these younger generations, they don't have the time. They're working 2 jobs in a lot of cases, so we're really trying to do as much as we can at the center, but we do rely on some home people, like you said.
Right.
Baby squirrels have to be fed. Little tiny guys have to be fed every few hours during the night and everything. Luckily, baby birds don't. they go to sleep and we're good. But and things like at my house, I have a flight aviary, and so when we get baby pigeons and they need to build up their wing strength before they're released, they come to me, and then they spend a couple weeks here in a large environment so they can become strong flyers. So things like that.
I think that's always the coolest thing. I mean, the wildlife, the problem with it, and you probably see this a lot of times, is that fine line of when to intervene, right? So I feel like so often people try to do the right thing by baby bird on the ground and saying this baby bird must need help because it can't fly yet, when in reality the baby bird is probably doing just fine there, and that's sort of the natural progression of how that bird needs to develop, and to try to leave it there. So trying to find that fine line of when this is normal wildlife behavior and part of how the process needs to go versus like if they truly need help.
Oh, definitely. It's really tricky, especially with a fledgling songbird or even a raptor, things like that. But it is a very fine line. A lot of people just say, oh, it's a fledgling, leave it. Well, there's a little more analysis that should happen. And we always encourage people to call us and say, tell us more about the situation. How long has it been there? Are parents around? Have you been able to watch? Are there any cats around? Is it just sitting huddled up in one spot, or is it moving around? So it's not so, like you said, it's a fine line. It's not always simple, but in a lot of cases, we call them, kidnapped babies that were probably okay, and people have good intentions. We totally understand. And, we're not going to turn anyone away, that brings us a bird, but songbirds actually make up about 50% of the animals that we get in, and mostly babies, and a lot of fledglings. So,
yeah.
And we do the best we can. We're not, the wildlife is always the best parents. We try, but it's always better if they can be with their parents.
Yeah, definitely.
So you mentioned the fires. Tell us about that whole rehab situation there.
Yes, definitely. So, for 2 years in a row, we had some pretty gnarly wildfires, and the first burned animal that we got in was a bobcat, and he had 5th degree burns, which I didn't even know existed, but his pads were burned to the bone.
Oh.
And they have to be in pretty bad shape for us to be able to even capture or find. That year we got in a bobcat, 2 foxes, and I want to say a coyote that year. Maybe that coyote was this year, but not very many considering how many animals were probably injured. Mm-hmm. But the UC Davis, as I mentioned, and actually they've now created this wildlife disaster network where they have working to get resources to help more animals and actually go out and, have people advise them on locating animals and things like that. So there's some groups that have mobilized, but so what we did was we talked to Dr. Jamie Payton, who's with UC Davis, and she's the one who developed this tilapia fish skin treatment. And not just the tilapia. I mean, that's the most amazing part of it is the tilapia. When she applied it to this bobcat, they change the bandages about every 3 days, and within that 3 days, you can already see improvement, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And it's not just the fish skins. She does a pain control regimen. So I have a little list here of what all she does. Okay. So they do antibiotics, pain medication, cold laser treatments, electromagnetic therapy, a burn cream, and acupuncture.
That's
So
awesome.
these guys, yeah, so they're in a lot of pain, but we do everything, possible to do that, to get them back out of pain.
Yeah, that must be like hard to manage too. I'm just sort of figuring like trying to actually handle those patients. I mean, it must prove a bit of a challenge, to try to, right, to manage them.
Especially as once they're healing and feeling a little better, the larger mammals, they're tough. That's for sure. And we're lucky to have experienced people. As I said, not every wildlife rehab facility or home rehabber, of course, has that capability. So we're very lucky to be able to do that.
Yeah, some of the larger, I mean, we had I forget what it was. It was some kind of it was a baby hoofed thing that just spent the night while it was waiting to be transported over to Tufts for rehab. And it had been like, I don't want to say it was a deer, but I don't know if you can have deer is like a protected thing too. So I don't know what it was, but it was like the mom was hit by a car and this thing is in this run and we have like a cover over it. And there was like a big sign, 3 doors outside of it, like, yes, there's a deer. No, don't look at it. Like,
right. It's so hard not to peek at them, but
you want to peek, but they like freaked out. Whatever it was, it must have been a deer. I don't know, but
right.
Yeah.
That's the thing too, is they're terrified of us.
Right. Right.
I've seen stories where people are like, "Oh, I found this, injured raptor, and I put it on my lap and drove it, and was petting its head to comfort it, and they're terrified. You
can only imagine what's going through that animal's head.
Right, exactly. And the only reason they're allowing it is because they're not in good shape. The first thing that is to kind of observe and maybe take a picture of the animal or get a little video, and then call your local rescue and tell them the situation and what's happening. Sometimes I'll have people text me a picture, or sometimes people think the bird's injured because it's been hanging around their yard, and I'll have them take some video, and I'll tell them kind of approach the bird. What does it do? And sometimes it flies off and it's just hanging around their yard, but call your local rescue. Don't wait too long for a response. Sometimes they're so busy they don't get back to you. So it's okay if you bring it there. They might advise you the animal's okay, go ahead and take it back. But I do want a couple things is never touch a mammal with your bare hands. Gloves are a good idea, period, but especially a mammal, especially rabies vector animals, because if there's any chance that you had contact with it, then we have to test that animal for rabies. And unfortunately, as you know, that means the animal has to be euthanized. So always wear gloves. One thing to know is an adult animal that lets you approach them, there's something wrong. Any adult wildlife, if you can get close to them, there's definitely something wrong, whether it be a bird or a mammal. When it's a baby, like I said, with fledglings, you kind of have to assess the situation. Sometimes they'll be, you can just see visually, but sometimes it takes a trained eye to do it. Like with baby mammals, sometimes we'll have actually like baby squirrels that they're kind of desperate, like they'll actually come toward you. So that's one way, like, is the animal kind of coming toward you or approaching people? Do you see blood or an injury, or is it covered in insects? As I mentioned before, has it been caught by a cat or a dog? Is it a baby and it's cold? They have to be warmed back up, or is it crying? So there's some different things to kind of look at. And then if you do decide it needs to be rescued, the best thing to do is get a box ready. Cut an air hole in it, put a towel on the bottom, have it ready to go. And then, like I said, put on some gloves, maybe grab a towel or a blanket to throw over the animal as you pick it up, or if you have a net, sometimes that works well, especially if it's a bird. So place the animal in that box. If it's a baby, get a heating pad, set it to low, put it under half the box, because you're going to want to warm up a baby. Don't give it any food or water, because sometimes that can make the situation worse. Sometimes we get people actually feeding baby birds water, which can go down the wrong pipe and give it pneumonia, things like that. Or if the baby's cold and you try to feed it and give it water, that they can't digest. So there are some reasons why we say don't give food or water. And then keep them in a warm, dark, and quiet place, keeping children and pets away, and try not to peek at them. To keep their stress levels down. Basically, there are literally some species that can die of fright. It might not happen right away, but it's a known phenomenon. I can't think of what it's called right now, but there's certain species that are really prone to. They get this cascade of issues that start affecting. I wish I could remember what it's called.
I can't remember either.
Yeah.
It happens like with rabbits, right? A lot of times like wild rabbits and bunnies and stuff like that, they often can die of fright, I feel like, they're
exactly. Yes. Yeah. And I'm glad you actually mentioned baby rabbits, because that's one that people find them. So there's certain mammals where a lot of the times the parents aren't constantly with the babies. So like rabbits will have a nest in the ground, and they'll leave their babies for hours at a time. So even if you think they're abandoned, and like a fawn is a good example. The mom will, only come back every so many hours, and the fawn will stay pretty quiet and kind of hidden away, but you might run across one and think it's been abandoned. Now, an example might be if that fawn approaches you and it's crying, there's maybe something wrong. You know.
Yeah. Well, those are all great things that I would never have thought of to tell people. So awesome.
It's complicated,
Yeah.
and it's kind of species specific, and I've been doing this a long time, so I kind of know some of these ins and outs, but there's a lot to learn.
Yeah.
For sure. It's why it's always good to call. And
that's why people should be calling and for sure, call before you do really anything to figure out if what you're doing is the right thing.
Yeah. We had a it was actually an EMT too once that was caring for a bunch of baby raccoons that were orphaned, and he brought them in because he thought that they had pneumonia, and in reality they were acting, two of them were acting neurologic, and we had to submit them for rabies, and unfortunately they were positive. And they had been exposed to himself and his children, and it was a big deal. So I think that is also another important concept, is that, the handling of these pets or of these animals, these are not pets, these are wildlife, and you're picking them up and bringing them into your home. And there could be a variety of different issues that's also bringing into your home.
Right. Especially with mammals, we're mammals too. So there are more zoonotic diseases that can get passed back and forth, less so with birds. But yes, you definitely have to be careful.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that happens.
Have you had to change things up a lot because of COVID?
We have, we had to, come up with some protocols, and, it's really critical that we keep functioning. So we really thought about what to do. So we halted our volunteer and our intern program while we kind of regrouped. That was last year as we were figuring everything out. And then it had to increase our staff. Luckily, we were able to apply for the loan, the paycheck, the loan to allow us to increase our staff. And then we wound up getting a state grant as well. It still wasn't enough. It was still a huge challenge. And then at some point we felt like we were ready to invite volunteers back, but of course not everybody is able to do or willing to
right?
do
As you'd said, you had sometimes an older population they're volunteering too,
right?
So they might be higher risk, right, for COVID.
Yeah, exactly. So it's been a real challenge, but all you can do is try to rise to it and do the best you can. And so we're getting ready for this season, and we're trying to things have changed a little bit, and we're just moving forward the best we can. And then our intake procedure changed as well, just like it has with vets. You deal with they pull up and you deal with them in the parking lot somewhat, things like that. So but we're making it.
I think it's so cool that we're talking to you today from you from California and us in Massachusetts, and I wonder, is there sort of a central communication board that you have with a lot of your wildlife rehabilitators across the country? Like, is there some place that you guys all go and utilize various things that have worked for you, and stuff like that seems to be working for your animals?
Yeah, there are some national associations where people can get online training, or they also have conferences. The National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association is the big one. There's also an international group. And then California, we have the California Council of Wildlife Rehabilitators. So, and then there's some Facebook groups where people collaborate and share, like, hey, we got this case in. What have you guys done? You know, 'cause sometimes there's some unusual cases or things that are specific to certain species, and there's some fine details. So we do collaborate a lot.
That's
and
awesome.
learn from each other. Yeah.
So one of these common questions that we get is like, or I see it on my town's Facebook site, and I just stay quiet until I have something valuable to add, because it's ridiculous sometimes. But what if you have, so say you have some kind of a wild animal that's a pest. There's a skunk in my
Right.
yard. So
Yeah.
these are not necessarily injured animals, right? So
Right.
do you have advice for people if they have that kind of a pest sort of situation where there's a wild animal that's kind of creating havoc?
Yeah. So I would, in that case, there's a few different resources. You know, I would call your local wildlife rescue, um, or try animal control, or the Fish and Wildlife Agency for advice. Really, prevention is the best thing to do. So sealing up any entry points on your home, not leaving any, like, don't feed your animals outside, don't leave any kibble outside. Bird feeders can attract, wildlife.
Maybe securing your trash bins,
Securing your
right?
trash bins, exactly. Things like that. So,
Yeah.
Trying to avoid them in the first place, but that can't always happen. Sometimes you don't realize there's an entry point. So somebody might have skunks that got into below their house or things like that. So best thing there is to talk to somebody about how to get them out and then seal it up.
I think that so often people feel as though they want to eliminate the fact of these wildlife creatures from being in their backyard. I mean, like for us, even in my town, I live in a fairly developed town, but there are forests and town forests nearby, and the coyotes are what drive everybody here just crazy. And
coyote sighting.
It is. They'll put it all over the Facebook pages. I see a coyote. And I mean, rightfully so. I mean, we've had dogs, like small dogs getting, right now we're in mating season. So they're definitely, right from January on, we start getting worried about them getting a little bit more territorial and aggressive. And so it is just kind of, realizing what you need to be aware of in your situation, in your, surroundings. You can't always eliminate these species from living with you. So you have to try to find a way to live harmoniously with all these guys. But yeah, letting your small dog out of sight is not a good idea when you're bordering the town forest. It's a hard lesson to learn.
Right, absolutely. And there's a group called Project Coyote. They have a Facebook page that will help people, how to understand how to deter coyotes, things like that. There's specific things you can do. We actually have a family that lives in our downtown Sacramento, which is a big, good-sized metropolitan area, but they're adapting, and we're seeing more and more wildlife in the city. So it's even more imperative that people learn how to deter and prevent issues from happening in the first place.
Do you see other species that you think are unsafe, or I guess either way? Do you see a lot of issues with our pets injuring wildlife and vice versa?
Oh, definitely. Dog and cat caught animals are one of the more common things that we see, unfortunately. So yeah, it's kind of a two-way street, keeping your animals away from wildlife as much as you can. With dogs, it's a little bit harder because they go in and out, keeping cats indoors or keeping them in a catio that people have been building, that's a great thing to do. Another thing for people to understand, if your cat or dog has caught an animal, even if they seem okay, if there's any little puncture, even one little puncture, or even just their saliva, it can be deadly. It's got a deadly bacteria, so it can kill them within about 24 to 48 hours. So it's really imperative to get that animal in, even if they think that the animal's actually okay. And so much of what we see is human caused, which pets are included in that.
Yep.
There's a lot of things like that. So another thing that I would say is kind of a myth is like a bird that hits a window. A lot of times you see advice, just give it some time, let it if it wakes up and it flies off, it's fine. Well, actually, the thinking on that has changed because you can get, I'm sure as you guys know, that with brain trauma, you can get swelling that continues to develop over the next 24 hours. And so that animal might fly off, but it might actually get worse. So we always advise bringing birds in that have had head trauma. So things like that. We get animals hit by cars. We get stuck in fences or netting. What are some other? Fishing line's a big one. Fish hooks. A lot of people aren't cleaning up their fishing line, and we get a lot of geese, for example, with it wrapped around a leg, or they've ingested it. We do get some cases where animals are purposefully been abused, which is really sad. So there's a lot of things in our environment that can be dangerous. We had one case that kind of made nationwide news. Is we had a coyote that got a jar stuck on its head. It had gotten into somebody's recycle bin or garbage, and I'm sure there was something good in there. Well, so somebody saw it, and we were trying to find this coyote for like 2 weeks. People had drones out, they were searching, and we finally found it. And so it must have been we figured it must have been figured out how to dunk its head in the water to get water into there, because how do you survive for 2 weeks, and so by the time we got it, the poor thing, she was in horrible shape. She was skin and bones, dehydrated, and it took a lot to bring her. She had been sprayed by a skunk, poor thing. So she was it was terrible. But with a lot of help, and we had to get some vets in there, we were able to bring her back. So
that's an awesome case. I was actually going to ask if you had a favorite case or a really memorable one or something like that. That's a cool case. Are there any other ones that you can remember, or things that you really enjoyed? Or something that happened that was a really either interesting or cool case?
Yeah, I think that coyote is probably the one that stands out most in my mind. And then the burned bobcat with the fact that it was able to recover and be released. And then, as I mentioned, this year, we got special permission to treat a bear cub that was burned. That baby was about 30 pounds, I think, when it came to us, maybe a little bit smaller. The little baby bear, the sweet little thing. And so that's not an animal I'd seen in captivity before. And it was very strong, even despite having very badly burned paws and a face. And so, I wasn't, I'm not a mammal person. I work more with birds, but I understand they had a lot of trouble wrangling the baby. And then especially, as I said, as they get bigger. But most of these you can find these on our Facebook page if you scroll back or search. And like I said, I think both of those actually made the news.
Excellent. And then, on the flip side, for the public, if they, have an interest in volunteering, do you just advise that they reach out to whomever they can find on their local? I guess each of the states often has listings of wildlife rehabbers. Is that right? I guess each state can be different, right?
Each state can be different. Hopefully, like our state has a list of all the wildlife rehabilitation facilities, but there's also a website called Animal Help Now. It's ahnow.org. And you can search, I think it's just the United States. You can search your location, and it'll tell you the nearest wildlife rescue facilities and which animals that they treat. So that's one way to locate your closest one. Whether it's you want to volunteer or whether you found an animal. They actually have an app too that you can put on your phone.
Or probably if you just want to donate money, right?
Oh yeah, yes, definitely.
We'll always
that's a great way to help.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's the biggest thing is finding somebody that will take the patients. And it is a common myth, I think, that vets always have this a little bit of an inhibition towards taking the wildlife because we're not licensed, right? So we say, no, we can't take it. We're not licensed rehabilitators. Right. But actually, the law does allow you to just provide kind of emergency care for like less than 24 hours for the patient. And so that's probably better than it sitting in a box in an owner's garage, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well,
Christy, do you want to shout out your website for us?
Oh, yes. So it's goldcountrywildliferescue.org. Yeah, and we also have a Facebook page that's we're really active on Facebook and post a lot of our little stories and things. So definitely take a look at us on Facebook. We're on Instagram as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
So any of our listeners that are close to any of our listeners that live close to you can definitely volunteer, especially if you've never done that kind of thing before, and donate or, seek out your local rescues to do the same.
Yes, they can definitely use your help. As I said, that all rescues provide our services for free to the public, but we also do rely on donations at the same time. So.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Christy. And thank you to our sponsor, Ethos Veterinary Health. Don't forget to please rate, review, and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. You can also watch the video version on YouTube and find us at Ethos Veterinary Health on YouTube. We will see you next month. Saying
Thank
goodbye.
you so much.
I'm Krista.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks again.